Welcome to Go Reading Bedtime Stories, presented by GoReadling.com. Personalized education and reading skills for kids. Find a comfortable spot, close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let our story carry you gently off to sleep. Tonight's story is called Winnie-the-Pooh and the Honey Tree. The 100 Acre Wood was a very special place indeed, a tapestry of greens and browns where ancient trees stood sentinel and tiny wildflowers painted the forest floor with splashes of joyful color. It was a place where the sunbeams danced through the leaves, casting shifting patterns on the mossy ground, and where the air often carried the sweet scent of blooming heather or the fresh, earthy smell of a recent shower. Here, in a cozy little house, nestled deep within the root of a grand old oak tree, lived Edward Bear, though everyone knew him best as Winnie-the-Pooh. Pooh was a bear of very little brain, it is true, but his heart was as big and warm as a summer's day, and his days were mostly spent wondering about things, like where the next pot of honey might appear, or whether it was time for a thoughtful hum. He loved his quiet home, the soft rustling of the leaves above his roof, and the gentle murmur of the stream, all part of the comforting symphony of the woods that made his world so wonderfully Poohish. His best friend, of course, was Christopher Robin, a boy with kind eyes and a knack for understanding bears. And then there were others, too, like the small, timid Piglet, who lived in a very small house next door, and wise old Owl, who lived in a grand house high in a tree, and even Eeyore, the rather gloomy donkey who often lost his tail, and sometimes Rabbit, who was very particular about his garden, and Kanga, with her little Roo, who hopped all over the place. One bright morning, as the sun climbed lazily into the sky and painted the dew-kissed leaves with a golden glow, Pooh awoke with a most peculiar feeling in his tummy. It wasn't exactly an ache, nor was it a grumble that demanded immediate attention, but rather a soft, gentle sort of emptiness, a quiet whispering that suggested something delightful might be missing from his day. He stretched his arms, feeling the comfortable softness of his fur, and listened to the cheerful chirping of a robin just outside his window. "Oh, bother," he murmured to himself, patting his round tummy thoughtfully. "I do believe it's a honey sort of day." With that important decision made, Pooh swung his legs out of bed, padded across the cool floor, and peeked into his larder, hoping to spy a forgotten pot. Alas, the shelves were bare, save for a few crumbs and the lingering sweet scent of happier times. This meant an adventure was surely afoot, for a bear's tummy, especially a bear like Pooh, simply could not be ignored when it spoke so clearly of honey. He decided a morning walk would be just the thing to ponder such a serious matter. So, with a hopeful skip in his step, Pooh ambled out into the sunshine, his paws making soft sounds on the grassy path. The air was fresh and sweet, smelling of damp earth and tiny wildflowers, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the trees, making a soothing, whispering sound. He hummed a little tuneless tune to himself, a happy sort of humming that meant he was thinking very hard about something, which in this case was honey. He walked past tall thistles and bright buttercups, past the quiet pond where the dragonflies shimmered like jewels, and deeper into the quiet parts of the 100 Acre Wood. And then, quite suddenly, a new sound drifted to his ears, a sound that made his ears twitch and his nose wrinkle with delight. It was a soft, busy sort of noise, a low, contented humming that seemed to dance on the breeze and promise wonderful things. It was a sound he knew very well, a sound that always made his heart beat just a little bit faster, with happy anticipation. It was the sound of bees, not just one or two wandering bees, but many, many bees, all working very hard and making that special, busy hum that meant only one thing to Pooh. "Oh my goodness," he whispered, his eyes wide and bright with sudden excitement. "Bees!"
He followed the sound, his nose twitching as the sweet scent of nectar and something else, something very delicious, grew stronger in the air. The buzzing led him deeper into a thicket of oak and ash trees, where the sunlight dappled through the leaves in patches of gold. And there, standing tall and proud, was a truly enormous oak tree, its branches reaching up towards the blue sky like gnarled arms. High up on its trunk, tucked away between two thick branches, was a small, dark hole, and from that hole poured a steady, cheerful stream of buzzing, busy bees. Pooh knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his tummy, that this was no ordinary tree. This was a honey tree, and inside, waiting for him, was a treasure beyond compare.
Pooh's heart gave a little thump of pure joy. Honey! So much honey, perhaps. He looked up at the hole, then down at his paws, then up again. It was a very, very tall tree, much taller than he was, and the branches looked quite slippery. But a bear with an empty tummy and the promise of honey sparkling in his eyes is a very determined bear indeed. He took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and began to climb. He stretched his paws, one after the other, gripping onto rough bark and little bumps, pushing himself upwards with all his might. But the tree was old and smooth in places, and Pooh's paws, while good for hugging, were not quite as good for climbing such a tall, straight trunk. He scrambled and wiggled, slipping a little, then finding a new hold. He got about halfway up, his nose almost close enough to sniff the sweet, warm smell properly, when his paw slipped on a patch of moss. With a little, "Oh dear," and a scramble that ended in a soft thud, Pooh found himself back on the grass, a little dusty but unharmed, save for a slightly bumped nose and a bruised ego. Climbing, he decided, was much harder than it looked, especially when honey was so high up.
Pooh sat down with a sigh, rubbing his nose and thinking very important thoughts. Climbing hadn't worked, and he couldn't simply wish the honey down, much as he might try. He needed a clever plan, a truly ingenious idea that would bring the sweet, golden goodness within his reach. And when Pooh needed a clever plan, there was only one person in the whole 100 Acre Wood who could truly help him. "Christopher Robin!" he exclaimed, suddenly feeling much more cheerful. Christopher Robin always knew what to do. He picked himself up, dusted off his fur, and set off through the trees, making his way towards Christopher Robin's house, which was just on the other side of the small stream, near the big sand pit. He walked with a renewed sense of purpose, his tummy rumbling a little louder now, reminding him of the delicious reward that awaited him if only Christopher Robin could help. The sun was getting a little higher, and the morning seemed to hum with the promise of adventure, even after his little tumble from the tree. When Pooh arrived at Christopher Robin's door, he knocked with a gentle tap, 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 and waited patiently. Christopher Robin opened the door, his eyes bright with a welcoming smile. "Hello, Pooh Bear," he said. "What brings you here so early?" Pooh explained his predicament, his voice a little wistful as he described the tall tree and the busy, unreachable bees. Christopher Robin listened carefully, nodding thoughtfully, as he always did when Pooh had a very important problem. He thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration, then his eyes lit up. "I know," he exclaimed, a happy spark in his voice. "We need a balloon." Pooh's eyes widened. A balloon? How wonderfully clever. Christopher Robin went inside and returned with a whole bunch of colorful balloons. "Which one, Pooh?" he asked, holding them out. Pooh carefully considered the choices, a bright yellow one, a cheerful green, a deep purple, and a lovely sky blue one. He thought about the sky and clouds and honey, and finally, with a thoughtful hum, he pointed to the blue one. "The blue one, please, Christopher Robin," he said. "It reminds me of a very fine day." Christopher Robin, understanding Pooh's serious decision, carefully chose the sky blue balloon and handed it to Pooh. "Now, what's the plan, Pooh Bear?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. Pooh explained his ingenious idea, which, for a bear of very little brain, was quite brilliant.
"I shall pretend to be a little dark cloud, Christopher Robin," he declared, puffing out his chest with pride. "And the bees, they won't suspect a thing. They will simply think I am a cloud, floating lazily by, and I shall float right up to the honey hole." Christopher Robin thought this was an excellent plan, almost as clever as a bear could be. But a cloud, Pooh, needs to be a little bit darker, doesn't it? He looked around, then spotted a muddy puddle nearby. "Aha," he said. Pooh, ever obliging, carefully rolled himself in the soft, dark mud, making sure to cover every bit of his lovely golden fur. When he was done, he looked rather like a very fluffy, slightly lumpy, dark gray cloud, which was exactly what he intended. He felt very clever indeed. With Pooh now looking suitably cloud-like, Christopher Robin held the string of the blue balloon very carefully. "Are you ready, Pooh?" he asked. Pooh nodded, feeling a thrilling mix of excitement and a tiny bit of nervousness in his tummy. He took a deep breath, and Christopher Robin let go of the string. Up, up, up Pooh went, holding onto the string with one paw, feeling the gentle tug of the balloon as it lifted him higher and higher towards the honey tree. He waved a paw at Christopher Robin, who looked very small on the ground below, waving back with a happy smile. The air grew cooler up high, and a soft breeze gently pushed him, making him sway ever so slightly. He felt very light, almost as if he truly were a cloud, drifting peacefully in the wide blue sky. He closed his eyes for a moment, enjoying the quiet serenity of floating, and then he opened them again, peering towards the honey tree, which was now much, much closer. The buzzing of the bees grew louder, a promising symphony to his ears, and the sweet, warm scent of honey filled the air around him, making his tummy rumble with happy anticipation. He drifted closer and closer to the honey hole, feeling the warm sunshine on his muddy fur. The bees, tiny specks darting in and out, seemed quite dizzy. Pooh held very still, trying his very best to look like a perfectly ordinary, fluffy cloud, the sort that just floats by, paying no attention to honey. He imagined himself to be a rather calm and dignified cloud, perhaps even a slightly thoughtful cloud, pondering the mysteries of the sky. He could almost taste the honey now, thick and golden, just waiting inside that dark hole. But then, a very large, rather cross-looking bee flew out of the hole and buzzed right past Pooh's nose. It paused, hovering for a moment, its tiny antenna twitching, as if sniffing the air with suspicion. Then it buzzed around Pooh once more, a little faster this time and a little louder. Pooh tried to look even more like a cloud, a very still, very un-honey-like cloud, but he had a funny feeling that the bee wasn't entirely convinced. Other bees started to emerge, buzzing in little circles, their hum growing steadily more inquisitive and a tiny bit alarming. Christopher Robin, watching from the ground below, noticed the bees' increasing suspicion. He knew he had to do something to distract them, to help Pooh maintain his cloud-like disguise. He put his hands to his mouth and called up to Pooh. "Pooh Bear, what are you doing up there?" Pooh, trying his best not to answer, simply gave a little shrug, which made him wobble slightly. "You're humming a little song, aren't you, Pooh?" Christopher Robin called again, a clever idea forming in his mind. "You're humming a cloud song, a little, quiet, cloudy sort of song for the bees." And then Christopher Robin began to hum a tune, a soft, tuneless little melody, hoping the bees would think it was the sound of a cloud, a musical cloud. He hummed and hummed, looking up at his friend, who was still trying very hard to look like a floating piece of sky. The bees, however, seemed more interested in the large, furry, slightly muddy cloud that was hovering so very close to their precious honey. Their buzzing grew louder, and they began to fly in ever tighter circles around Pooh, their little eyes gleaming with a growing sense of alarm. The situation was becoming rather sticky, and not in the delicious honey sort of way. Pooh could feel the buzzing all around him, a loud, insistent noise that vibrated through the balloon string and up his paw. He could even feel the tiny currents of air from their fast-beating wings tickling his nose. The bees were definitely not fooled. They knew a bear when they saw one, even a muddy, blue balloon-carrying bear. One particularly brave, or perhaps very cross, bee actually landed on his nose, tickling him dreadfully. Pooh tried very hard not to sneeze, knowing that a sneezing cloud might give the game away entirely. Christopher Robin, seeing the rapidly escalating bee situation and the worried look on Pooh's cloud face, knew that the clever plan had alas gone a little bit wrong. He couldn't let Pooh stay up there with so many suspicious bees. He had to get his friend down, and quickly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small air gun, the kind that shot little pellets of clay. With a sigh, knowing it was the only way, he aimed carefully at the blue balloon, hoping it would bring Pooh gently back to earth.
With a soft pop, the blue balloon burst, and Pooh, with a little "oh bother," began to float downwards, not too fast, not too slowly, but with a gentle, wobbly descent, like a fluffy dandelion seed caught on a breeze. The air rushed past his ears, and the buzzing of the bees grew fainter and fainter as he drifted away from the honey tree. He landed softly on a patch of springy grass, a little dusty, a little dizzy, but quite unharmed, save for a general feeling of disappointment. The honey, alas, remained in the tree, safe from Pooh's eager paws. Christopher Robin rushed over, full of concern. "Are you all right, Pooh Bear?" he asked, helping his friend sit up. Pooh nodded, shaking his head gently. "Quite all right, Christopher Robin," he mumbled. "But the bees, they were very, very clever. They knew I wasn't a cloud. Not really." He sighed, a small, sad sigh. The sun was still warm, the birds were still singing, but the promise of honey had faded like a whispered dream. What was a bear to do when his tummy was still rumbling, and his honey plan had quite spectacularly failed? The afternoon sun began its slow journey towards evening, casting longer shadows across the 100-acre wood. Pooh and Christopher Robin walked slowly, hand in paw, Pooh still feeling a little bit sorry for himself about the honey that remained stubbornly in the tree. His tummy, however, had a most remarkable way of forgetting past disappointments and focusing entirely on present needs. And at this present moment, his tummy was rumbling again, a deep, persistent sort of rumble that suggested serious attention was required. "Christopher Robin," Pooh began, "my tummy is feeling rather empty, despite all the adventure." Christopher Robin nodded understandingly. A bear's tummy was a very important thing. "Perhaps," Pooh continued, with a hopeful glance towards a familiar path, "perhaps Rabbit might have a little something. He is always so particular about his hospitality." Christopher Robin agreed that this was an excellent idea, for Rabbit, despite his fussiness, was usually very kind to his friends, especially when they had a rumbling tummy. So they changed direction, their footsteps crunching softly on the dry leaves, making their way towards Rabbit's very neat and tidy house. They soon arrived at Rabbit's front door, a tidy little entrance with a sign that said "Rabbit" in very neat letters. Pooh knocked gently. After a moment, the door opened a crack, and Rabbit's twitching nose appeared, followed by his bright, quick eyes. "Oh, Pooh Bear, Christopher Robin, what a surprise," Rabbit said, though his voice held a hint of polite surprise that suggested unannounced visitors were not always his favorite kind. Do come in," he added, pushing the door open wider. Rabbit's house was always very clean and organized, with little jars of things on shelves and a pleasant, earthy smell that reminded Pooh of carrots and sensible vegetables. Pooh and Christopher Robin stepped inside, Pooh trying very hard not to track any lingering mud from his cloud disguise onto Rabbit's spotless floor. Rabbit, ever the thoughtful host, gestured towards two comfortable chairs. "Would you care for a small something?" he asked, his whiskers twitching politely. Pooh's tummy gave a particularly loud rumble at the mention of something, and his eyes, ever hopeful, began to scan Rabbit's tidy kitchen for any delicious clues. Rabbit, seeing Pooh's earnest expression, went to a cupboard and produced 2 plates, one with a biscuit and one with a little bit of honey. He placed them carefully on a small, round table. "Perhaps a spot of honey, Pooh," he offered, gesturing to the small pot. Pooh's eyes lit up like 2 bright buttons. Honey! He had forgotten all about the disappointment of the honey tree. This was real honey, right here, right now, in a lovely little pot, just waiting for him. "Oh, Rabbit, you are truly the kindest of friends," Pooh exclaimed, reaching eagerly for the pot.
Christopher Robin smiled, amused by Pooh's sudden change of spirits. Pooh took the spoon, a very small spoon, and began to eat. The honey was thick and golden, with a smooth, warm sweetness that made his paws tingle and his heart sing a happy tune. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the delicious taste, the gentle stickiness on his tongue. This was exactly what his tummy had been asking for, all along.
One spoonful led to another, and then another, each one bringing more contented sighs from Pooh. The little pot of honey was soon empty, but Rabbit, seeing Pooh's obvious enjoyment, and perhaps wanting to be a very generous host, had brought out another pot, and then another. Pooh, who was a bear of very polite manners, felt it would be quite rude not to accept such lovely offerings. He ate with earnest dedication, a quiet, happy hum rumbling deep in his chest. The golden honey vanished spoonful by spoonful, leaving a sweet, warm feeling of satisfaction spreading through his very round tummy. He felt plump and content, the worries of the morning's failed cloud adventure quite forgotten in the glorious sweetness of the moment. Christopher Robin watched with a gentle smile, knowing that a bear and his honey were a special sort of happy sight. Rabbit, however, began to look a tiny bit concerned as the stack of empty honey pots grew steadily taller on his tidy kitchen table, and Pooh grew steadily rounder in his comfortable chair, his fur stretched tight with contentment.
Finally, with a contented sigh that was more of a wheeze, Pooh finished the last spoonful from the very last pot. He sat back in his chair, feeling wonderfully, gloriously full. He was so full, in fact, that he felt quite enormous, like a fluffy, honey-filled balloon. His tummy, which had once felt so empty, now felt wonderfully, delightfully tight, like a drum that had been beaten just a little too hard. "Thank you, Rabbit," Pooh said, his voice a little muffled by his fullness. "That was truly, wonderfully, the best honey I have ever tasted." Rabbit, who had been watching with a worried twitch of his whiskers, simply nodded, a rather strained look on his face. Pooh tried to stand up, a little wobbly on his paws, and felt a strange sort of tightness all around his middle. He felt rather like a cork that had been pushed into a bottle and then swelled up. He looked at Christopher Robin with wide, slightly bewildered eyes. "Oh, bother," he murmured. "I do believe I am rather full." It was time to go home, Pooh decided, with a final pat to his very round tummy. He said his goodbyes to Rabbit, who was still looking a little pale at the sight of his depleted honey stores, and turned towards the door. But as he tried to squeeze through the small, neat opening, something quite unexpected happened. Pooh pushed, and he squeezed, and he wiggled, but he simply could not pass through. He was stuck. His head and shoulders were through, but his very round middle, which had so happily consumed all that delicious honey, was quite firmly wedged in the doorway. He pushed again with a little grunt, and then again with a little huff, but it was no use. He was as firmly stuck as a cork in a bottle, and a very large fluffy cork at that. "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear," cried Pooh, feeling a sudden wave of alarm. He looked back at Rabbit, his eyes wide. Rabbit, for his part, looked absolutely horrified. His neat, tidy door stuck with a bear. Christopher Robin, seeing the predicament, hurried over, trying to suppress a little smile, for it was in its own way rather a funny sight, though clearly a problem. Rabbit wrung his paws, his ears drooping with dismay. "Oh, my dear Pooh! Oh, my beautiful door! Whatever shall we do?" he exclaimed, hopping from foot to foot with worry. Christopher Robin, always the calm one, knelt down beside Pooh, who was looking rather forlorn with his front half in Rabbit's house and his back half in the garden. "Don't worry, Pooh Bear," Christopher Robin said gently. "We'll get you out." He tried to give Pooh a gentle push, but Pooh didn't budge. He pulled ever so carefully, but Pooh was quite thoroughly stuck. It was clear that a simple push or pull would not solve this particular problem. Pooh sighed.
a rather sad, puffed-out sigh. Christopher Robin sat down on the grass, thinking very hard, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sun was beginning to dip below the trees, casting long purple shadows, and the air grew cooler. It was quite a predicament for a bear to be stuck in a door, especially when the day was turning into evening, and he really ought to be at home thinking about supper. Christopher Robin, after much careful thought, finally had an idea, though it wasn't one that Pooh found entirely agreeable. "Pooh Bear," he said gently, "there's only one thing for it. You've eaten so much honey, you're quite simply too big to fit through the door. You'll have to stay here, stuck, until you get a little bit, well, smaller." Pooh's eyes grew wide with dismay. Stay stuck? In Rabbit's door? For how long? "Oh, bother," he mumbled, feeling a little tear prickle at the corner of his eye. Rabbit, still looking very worried, nodded in agreement. "It's the only sensible solution, Pooh," he said. "It's a matter of physics, you see." Christopher Robin promised to visit every day and bring him stories. Pooh, still feeling very full and rather sorry for himself, understood that there was no other way. He closed his eyes, imagined a lovely pot of honey, and then tried very hard to imagine it disappearing, spoonful by spoonful, until he was once again his usual, comfortable, unstuck size. The evening air grew quiet, save for the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a cricket. So, for a whole week, Pooh stayed stuck in Rabbit's doorway. It was a rather peculiar place to be, with his head inside, enjoying the quiet of Rabbit's house, and his bottom outside, feeling the gentle breeze and watching the clouds drift by. Christopher Robin was true to his word, visiting every day. He would sit on the grass beside Pooh's stuck bottom and read aloud from one of his favorite books, his voice soft and soothing as the words floated out into the quiet garden. Pooh listened intently, the stories of brave knights in faraway lands filling his bare brain, making the time pass a little more quickly. He thought about the stories and about honey, and sometimes he hummed a little tune, a very quiet, stuck bear sort of tune. Rabbit, despite his initial distress, brought Pooh's small, sensible meals that were definitely not honey and helped him feel as comfortable as possible. Each day, Pooh felt a tiny bit less stuck, a little less tight, as if the honey was slowly but surely making its way to all the right places, making him less enormous and more his familiar, cuddly self again. He dreamed of being free, of walking through the woods, and perhaps, just perhaps, of another small pot of honey, much, much later. Day by day, the tightness around Pooh's middle lessened, little by little, like a slowly deflating balloon. The stories Christopher Robin read helped to distract him from the patience required, and the quiet visits of Piglet, who would sometimes bring a little wildflower and offer a gentle, "Are you quite comfortable, Pooh?" made the days pass more gently. Rabbit, checking Pooh each morning, began to look less anxious and more hopeful. Finally, one bright morning, after a whole week had passed, Christopher Robin came to visit, and as he sat down beside Pooh, he noticed a definite difference. Pooh looked a little less round, a little less wedged. "I think," said Christopher Robin, his eyes twinkling, "I think today might be the day, Pooh Bear." Pooh wiggled a little, and indeed, he felt a definite give, a tiny loosening around his middle. A group of friends, including Piglet and Eeyore, who had come to offer their moral support, gathered around, ready to help in the grand extraction. The air buzzed with a quiet excitement, a sense of happy anticipation. With a shared breath, Christopher Robin pulled from the outside, while Rabbit very carefully pushed from the inside. Piglet and Eeyore stood by, ready to cheer or offer a gentle nudge if needed. Pooh held his breath, squeezed his eyes shut, and braced himself. There was a gentle, soft stretching, a little squish, and then, with the most satisfying pop, Pooh suddenly popped free from Rabbit's doorway, landing with a soft tumble on the grass. He wasn't hurt at all, just a little bit surprised, and wonderfully, gloriously unstuck. Everyone cheered. Even Eeyore managed a small, almost smile. Pooh sat up, rubbing his tummy, which now felt quite normal and not at all like a drum. He looked at the doorway, then at his friends, and then back at his tummy. "Oh, Father," he said, a happy, relieved sigh escaping him. "I do believe I am a bear of ordinary size again." Christopher Robin hugged him tightly. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with soft oranges and purples, and a gentle coolness began to drift through the 100-acre wood. It was time for a very contented bear to go home, ready for a well-deserved, peaceful evening after a most adventurous week.
As the last colors of the sunset faded from the sky, giving way to the soft, velvety darkness of twilight, Christopher Robin and Pooh walked hand in paw through the quiet paths of the 100-acre wood. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and night-blooming flowers, and the first tiny stars began to twinkle like scattered diamonds in the darkening blue above. The trees whispered gentle secrets to each other, and the distant hoot of an owl added to the peaceful symphony of the night. Pooh felt wonderfully light and free, his tummy a comfortable, happy shape, and his heart full of quiet contentment. He leaned his head against Christopher Robin's side, feeling the warmth of his friend, and thought about the day, the bees, the honey, and the very long week in Rabbit's store. All adventures, big and small, always felt just right when he was with Christopher Robin, knowing he was loved and safe. The moon, a crescent sliver, began to peek over the tallest trees, casting a soft silver glow on their path, guiding them gently home. And now, my dear little one, as you snuggle down, warm and safe in your own bed, with dreams as soft as Pooh's fur and as sweet as honey, may your night be filled with the gentlest dreams and the quietest peace, until the sun brings a new day and new adventures. Good night, sweet child. Sleep well. And that is the end of our story. Thank you for listening to GoReadling Bedtime Stories. Visit GoReadling.com for more stories, reading adventures, and fun learning for kids. Sweet dreams, little one. Good night.